I live in a quiet suburb of Perth, Australia, and this happened when I was 15, home alone on a typically peaceful evening. It was around 9 p.m., and I had just stepped out of the bathroom, feeling the cool air against my skin as I dried my hands. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of our front gate creaking open echoed through the house, followed immediately by our dog's frenzied barking. The sound sent a jolt of unease through me, tightening my grip on the towel. Across the hall, I caught a glimpse of something, or rather someone, darting past the porch window. The figure moved swiftly, disappearing into the shadows of our backyard. I only managed to see him for a split second, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. He was hunched over, his skin an eerie, sickly pale, and he wore all black. His long, tangled hair partially obscured his face, giving him a disheveled, almost ghostly appearance. My heart raced as I made my way into the living room, where our dog stood growling fiercely at the front door. His low, guttural growls filled the space, and I could feel his tension mirroring mine own. My mind raced with questions. Who was this person, and what did they want? More importantly, why hadn't they left yet? I waited by the door, every muscle in my body taut with anxiety, expecting the figure to reappear at any moment, but he never did. The minutes dragged on, the silence growing heavier with each passing second. Just when I began to think he might have left, another figure emerged from the darkness. This time, it was a more normal-looking man who approached the porch with purposeful strides. He stopped just outside the security bars, peering into the house with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Despite his more ordinary appearance, something about him didn't sit right with me. His presence felt off, like an intruder trying too hard to blend in. He spoke first, his voice carrying an unsettling calmness. "Hey, have you seen my friend?" he asked, his eyes locked onto mine. The question sent a wave of confusion through me. I hesitated before responding, my voice shaky. "Yeah, I think he's in my backyard." The man nodded as if this was exactly the answer he expected. "Okay, thanks. I've been following this random guy all over the place. I think he's on drugs and might be dangerous." His words hung in the air, each one sinking into my gut like a stone. What did he mean by random guy when he had just referred to him as his friend? Something about this whole situation felt wrong, very wrong. My instincts screamed at me to be cautious, to keep my distance, but I was too stunned to react quickly. The man didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked off into the darkness towards the backyard, his figure soon swallowed by the night. I should also mention that there's a back door to our house, but it's secured with heavy-duty security bars, and the door itself was locked at the time. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled deep in my chest. I returned to the front door, my mind racing with scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. Minutes passed, each one dragging on like an eternity, until the man reappeared on the porch. This time, he wasn't alone. He had the pale, gaunt man with him, the one who had initially fled into my backyard. The pale man was pacing back and forth, his movements jerky and agitated, as if he were barely holding himself together. The normal-looking man spoke again, his tone smooth, almost too casual. "Hey, sorry about earlier. I found him, but he's really nervous. He'd feel a lot better if you could just unlock the door and come out here for a minute, just so he can see you're harmless." The request was ludicrous. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. The pale man had stopped pacing now and was staring at me through the bars, his eyes wide and unblinking, filled with an intensity that made my skin crawl. There was something unhinged in his gaze, something that set off every alarm in my body. The silence that followed was suffocating. I didn't say a word, but the tension in the air was palpable. I slowly began to step forward, my mind screaming at me to shut the door, to lock myself inside. As I moved, the normal-looking man lunged at the door, his hand shooting through the bars in a desperate attempt to grab me. I jumped back, my heart hammering in my chest as I slammed the door shut with my foot, bolting it with trembling hands. My mind raced, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I fumbled for my phone, dialing my parents in a panic. When they answered, their voices were calm, but I could hear the urgency behind their words as they told me to call the police. The two men were gone by the time the police arrived. They searched the area, but there was no sign of them. The officers mentioned that there had been a break-in just down the street less than an hour ago, and I couldn't help but wonder if the two incidents were connected. The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through me. Looking back, it seems likely that the first man ran into the backyard to find a way inside while the second man went to assist him. They were back there for so long, trying to find a way into my home. What disturbs me most is the fact that they didn't just want to break in. They wanted me to come outside to them, or worse, for them to get inside to where I was. The thought still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling that if I had made one wrong move that night, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. It was a Thursday night, and the house felt eerily quiet. My mom was working a late shift at the hospital. My two older brothers were away at college, and for the first time in a long while, I had the place to myself. The empty silence was both liberating and unsettling. I had a few friends over earlier in the evening. We watched a baseball game, cracked open a few beers, and laughed about old memories. It was one of those nights that felt just right, comfortable, and familiar. When the game ended, my friends left through the back door, their laughter fading into the night as I locked up behind them. I made my way upstairs to the kitchen, the house now silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I gathered up the remaining beers, placing them carefully in the fridge, and then began my nightly routine of getting ready for bed. I wasn't particularly tired, but I knew I should try to get some sleep. After all, it was a school night. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint ticking of the clock on my nightstand. The house was so still, so quiet, that I could hear every creak and groan as it settled in the cool night air. Just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard the soft, almost hesitant sound of footsteps coming up the stairs outside my room. Relief washed over me. My mom was finally home. I listened as the footsteps paused outside my door, followed by the familiar sound of her light cough. She then continued down the hall and into the bathroom. The noise of running water was faint but comforting, a sign of normalcy in the otherwise quiet house. After a few minutes, I heard her go back downstairs to the kitchen, where she began moving around, opening cabinets, clinking dishes together. The noise was much louder now, almost as if she was deliberately trying to make a racket. I sighed, feeling a flicker of annoyance. I was too lazy to get out of bed and ask her to keep it down, so I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and sent her a quick text. "Mom, can you please stop making so much noise? I'm trying to sleep." Satisfied, I placed my phone back on the desk and rolled over, hoping to finally get some rest. But then, just as I was getting comfortable, I heard the footsteps again, this time much quicker, almost urgent. My bedroom door creaked open, and I saw the silhouette of my mom standing in the doorway. The hallway light was off, so her figure was shrouded in darkness, just a shadowy outline against the dim light from the window. Something was off. I couldn't see her face, but the way she stood there, slouched and silent, sent a chill down my spine. I sat up in bed, my voice tinged with frustration. "Mom, seriously, stop making so much noise. I need to sleep." But she didn't respond. She just stood there, unmoving, her posture rigid and unnatural. I felt the vibration on the desk beside me and instinctively reached for my phone. When I saw the name on the screen, my blood ran cold. It was a text from my mom. "Still at work. Won't be home for a few more hours." I dropped my phone onto the bed, my heart pounding in my chest as I slowly looked up at the doorway. The figure standing there wasn't my mom. Panic surged through me, my mind racing the possibilities. Who was this? How had they gotten into my house? Despite the fear gripping me, I knew I had to stay calm, had to think clearly. I forced myself to speak, keeping my voice steady. "Mom, I really need to sleep. Please go downstairs." I was hoping, praying, that whoever it was would be fooled, that they'd think I didn't realize they weren't supposed to be there. But the figure didn't move, didn't say a word. Instead, the silence was broken by a low, raspy voice, crackling and rough like sandpaper. The words were almost unintelligible, but I could just make out what she was saying. "Don't know where to go. Don't know where to go." The words sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized with growing horror that the figure was inching closer to my bed. Her hands, wrinkled and bony, reached out towards me, the dim light catching the wild glint in her eyes. She kept repeating the same phrase over and over, her voice rising in pitch, becoming more frantic. Fear gave way to instinct, and I screamed at her to get back, my voice breaking with panic. My hand fumbled for the lamp switch next to my bed, and as the light flicked on, I was faced with an old woman, her hair white and wiry, her clothes dirty and disheveled. Her eyes were wide with madness, and she was so close now, her hand outstretched as if she was about to grab me. I jumped out of bed, bolting for the door, and slammed it shut behind me, holding it closed with all my strength as she began pounding on it from the other side. Her screams were relentless, her voice a mix of desperation and rage. "I need to get out. I need to get out," she shrieked, each word punctuated by the forceful thud of her fists against the door. My mom kept calling my phone, but I couldn't answer. I was too focused on keeping the door shut, on holding back this crazed intruder who seemed determined to get to me. The minutes stretched on, each one an eternity, until finally I heard the sound of police sirens outside. The banging on the door stopped, and I heard the woman's frantic footsteps as she ran down the stairs. I opened the door just in time to see her sprint towards the front door, but the police were already there, pinning her against the wall and putting her in handcuffs. I was in shock, my body trembling with adrenaline as I tried to explain everything that had happened. The police listened, their faces grim as they told me that based on her behavior and my account, she would need to be evaluated for mental illness. It later turned out that she was indeed suffering from severe mental health issues. After the police left, I learned that I had forgotten to lock the back door after my friends had left. That's how she had managed to get inside, to invade my home. The thought of it still haunts me. The idea that someone could just walk into your home uninvited and turn your world upside down. Every time I hear a noise in the night now, I have to look to check, to make sure there isn't someone standing in the shadows waiting. If you've made it this far, you're 100% a horror fanatic and we approve. If you love our campfire-themed horror storytelling experience, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our daily uploads. Before I moved to California, I lived in the middle of nowhere on my dad's sprawling ranch in rural Montana. The property was vast and beautiful, with rolling hills, dense woods, and fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was the kind of place that looked like it was plucked straight out of a postcard, peaceful, serene, and seemingly untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But as much as I loved the beauty of the land, I never enjoyed living in such a remote setting. It was too isolated, too quiet, and there was always this underlying sense of unease that I couldn't quite shake. The ranch was miles away from the nearest town, and the only company we had were the cattle and the occasional trespasser. There had been a few incidents over the years, strangers wandering onto our property, sometimes harmlessly, sometimes not. My dad, being the protective type, owned 3 different guns and wasn't shy about using them if necessary. There was one time he had to chase off a couple of men who had ventured too close to the house with what I could only assume were bad intentions. The event I'm about to tell you about happened a few years back, in the middle of June. It was one of those hot summer nights, the kind where the air feels thick and heavy, making it impossible to sleep. My parents were on vacation together, and my younger brother was out with friends, leaving me alone on the ranch. I stayed up late, as I often did, watching TV in the living room. The house was dark except for the glow of the screen, and I had all the windows open to let in whatever cool breeze I could catch. The ranch was usually quiet at night, with only the sounds of the crickets and the occasional coyote howling in the distance. It was around 1 a.m. when I noticed the motion-sensing patio light flick on outside. That light was sensitive. It only turned on when there was noticeable movement by a person. My first thought was that my brother had returned home, though it was a bit later than I expected him. Still, to be safe, I got up and walked over to the window, peering out into the darkness. But there was no one there. The light illuminated the patio and the yard beyond, but the space was empty. I frowned, feeling a twinge of unease, and pulled out my phone to call my brother. The call went straight to voicemail. I waited for a moment, hoping to see headlights pulling up the driveway, but there was nothing. Just the dark, empty yard and the hum of the crickets. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was probably just a stray animal that had triggered the light, and went back to the couch. But then came the knocking. The sound was sharp and insistent, coming from the front door. Our door had a peephole, an essential feature given how far out of the way you had to go to reach our house. Anyone who showed up at our door was either lost or had a very specific reason for being there. I walked over to the door, peering through the peephole, but to my surprise, no one was there. The porch was empty, the night still and quiet. My heart began to beat a little faster, a sense of unease creeping in. Was someone playing a prank? Was it a group of kids from town, or maybe even my brother trying to mess with me? I shut the blinds, the uneasy feeling growing stronger. I shot my brother a quick text, jokingly telling him that if I found out it was him, I wouldn't let him in. But the thought of it being him seemed less and less likely. The next knock was so loud it made me jump. It came from the living room window, right behind where I had been sitting. My heart pounded in my chest as I whipped around, but what I heard next made my blood run cold. Two voices, one deep and male, the other high-pitched and female, spoke in unison from outside the window. "We see you." Every muscle in my body tensed as fear surged through me. It took a moment for the words to sink in, to realize that this wasn't some innocent prank. Someone, or rather two people, were outside my house, and they were watching me. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of what was happening. Was it possible that my brother and his girlfriend were trying to scare me? The thought seemed almost ridiculous, but in my panic, I latched onto it, hoping against hope that it was true. But the banging didn't stop. The knocks moved from one window to the next, growing louder, more frantic. I could see two figures outside the dining room window, their shapes barely visible through the partially closed blinds. They stood there, unmoving, but I couldn't make out their faces. The light from the patio only cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the figures look even more menacing. I felt a surge of panic, realizing that whoever they were relentless. They weren't going to stop. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest, heading straight for my dad's room. He had always kept a gun under the bed for emergencies, and now, more than ever, I was grateful for his caution. I found the rifle exactly where he said it would be, and with shaking hands, I loaded it. I wasn't a marksman by any means, but I knew how to use a gun, and in that moment, it was the only thing that gave me a sense of control. With the rifle in hand, I made my way back downstairs, the sound of the pounding growing louder and more desperate. I headed straight for the front door, my grip on the gun tightening as I steeled myself for whatever was out there. When I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me sharp and bracing. I scanned the area, doing a quick lap around the house, but the figures were gone. The yard was empty, the only sound now the rustling of the leaves in the breeze. I checked on the cattle, making sure they were undisturbed before heading back inside. I locked every door, every window, and finally, I went to bed, the rifle still by my side. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the silence, my mind replaying the events of the night over and over. Just as I was beginning to relax, to convince myself that it was over, I heard it, a frantic pounding at the front door, accompanied by a man's voice, screaming at the top of his lungs. He wasn't shouting words, just screaming, a sound so primal, so filled with rage that it made my blood run cold. I grabbed the rifle, ran to the living room window, and without hesitation, I pushed it open and fired a shot into the night. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the night, and immediately, the screaming stopped. I heard the footsteps, 2 sets, thundering away from the porch, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. The next morning, the sun rose over the ranch, the events of the night before feeling like a distant nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare, it was real, and it was a stark reminder of how vulnerable we were, even in the middle of nowhere. When my dad heard what had happened, he was proud of me for protecting the property, for standing my ground, and I was grateful that he had taught me how to use that rifle, that he had prepared me for something like this. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the sense that something was watching, waiting. I never found out who those people were or why they had come to our house, but the memory of that night has stayed with me, a reminder of how quickly things can go from peaceful to terrifying. It was a warm spring night, and I was home alone, lying on my bed with my phone in hand, talking to my friend Lily over FaceTime. We chatted about school, our friends, and the usual gossip, our conversation light and easy. I paced back and forth in my room as we talked, my footsteps almost rhythmic against the wooden floor. At one point, as I passed by the window, something outside caught my eye. I paused, turning back to the window for a better look, and felt my heart skip a beat. There, on the street, was a man standing perfectly still, his body facing my house, his gaze fixed on my window. He was too far away to make out any details, but the way he stood there, so still, so focused, sent a chill down my spine. "Lily, there's someone outside," I whispered, my voice barely audible as I continued to watch the man. "He's just standing there, staring at my house." Lily's voice came through the phone, a mix of concern and disbelief. "What do you mean? Where? Show me." I tried to angle the phone's camera towards the window, but the man was just a shadowy figure in the distance, too far for Lily to see clearly. "I can't get a good shot," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "He's too far away." "Call your mom and dad," Lily urged, her tone serious now. "Don't take any chances." I hesitated, my eyes still locked on the figure outside. He hadn't moved, hadn't even flinched. It was like he was a statue, perfectly still, perfectly focused. My stomach twisted with anxiety, but I knew Lily was right. I needed to call someone. "I'll call you back," I told her, ending the FaceTime call and immediately dialing my mom. It was late, probably around midnight, and I knew she'd be asleep, but I had to try. The phone rang a few times before she picked up, her voice groggy. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Mom," I whispered, my voice shaking. "There's a man outside. He's just standing there, looking at the house." There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear her sitting up in bed, the concern clear in her voice. "Where is he? Is he on our property?" "No," I replied, glancing back out the window. "He's on the street, but he's looking right at my window." My mom sighed, trying to sound reassuring despite the worry I could hear in her voice. "Listen, just turn off the lights and shut the blinds. He'll go away. It's probably just some weirdo, but if he steps onto the property, call the police." Okay, I agreed, though I wasn't entirely convinced, but I didn't want to worry her any more than I already had, so I did as she said. I turned off the lights, pulled the blinds down over the window, and sat back on my bed, my heart still racing. The house was plunged into darkness, and the silence felt heavy, oppressive. I tried to push the thought of the man out of my mind, but the image of him standing there so still kept playing over and over in my head. What was he doing? Why was he just standing there? I couldn't take it anymore. Curiosity and fear gnawed at me until I couldn't resist. I had to know if he was still out there. I got up from the bed, walked over to the window, and slowly lifted the blinds just enough to peek outside. My breath caught at my throat. He was closer now, standing on the sidewalk directly in front of my house. He was still looking up at my window, his posture unchanged, as if he hadn't moved an inch. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. Without hesitation, I grabbed my phone and called the police. The operator's voice was calm and professional, but the question she asked only heightened my anxiety. "Is the man holding any weapons?" she asked. I don't think so," I stammered, my eyes still locked on the figure outside. "But he's just standing there, staring at my house." "Okay, stay calm," the operator said. "We'll send a patrol car to your location. If he doesn't leave within 10 minutes or if he steps onto your property, call us back immediately." "Okay," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling, and backed away from the window. I didn't dare look again, too afraid of what I might see. Instead, I crawled back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin as I called Lily back on FaceTime. We talked for a while, her voice a soothing presence in the darkness. She kept telling me everything would be fine, that the police would scare him off, and I tried to believe her. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of a car engine outside. I got up and walked over to the window, peeking through the blinds just as a police patrol car came down the block. The spotlight on the side of the car swept across the front of my house, illuminating the yard and the street beyond. The car stopped briefly in front of my house, the light lingering on the spot where the man had been standing. But when I looked closer, he was gone. The patrol car moved on, driving slowly down the street, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Lily's voice brought me back to reality. Is he gone? Yeah, I said, relief flooding through me. He's gone. I finished the call with Lily, thanking her for staying on the line with me, and finally went to bed, feeling a little safer now that the police had come by. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay there in the darkness, every creak and groan of the house making me jump. Then, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it, a soft, cracking sound coming from outside. My heart skipped a beat, and I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The sound came again, louder this time, like wood splintering. I got out of bed and walked over to the window, my hands trembling as I lifted the blinds. There was nothing there, no sign of the man, but the sound continued, closer now, like something or someone was climbing the side of the house. Panic surged through me as I realized what was happening. He was trying to get in. I ran to the other window and threw it open, leaning out and screaming for help as loud as I could, hoping to wake the neighbors. I grabbed my phone and called 911 again, my voice shaking as I told the operator what was happening. She assured me that another car was on the way, but it felt like it would take forever. Then, in the midst of my panic, I heard a noise from outside, a voice. I looked out the window and saw one of my elderly neighbors standing in their yard, shouting something. The next time I looked at the window where I had heard the cracking sounds, the man was gone. My neighbor must have scared him off. When the police arrived again, I told them everything that had happened. They searched the area but found no sign of the man. They promised to patrol the neighborhood all night, and after they left, I finally collapsed onto my bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. That night left me shaken, a constant reminder of how vulnerable we are, even in our own homes. I still don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but the thought of him climbing the side of my house, trying to get in, haunts me to this day.